Hello and welcome. The readings for the 33rd Sunday of the year, they come from Matthew 25, beginning at verse 14. Jesus spoke this parable to his disciples. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who was on his way abroad. And he summoned his servants and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to a third 1, each in proportion to his ability, and then he set out. The man who had received the 5 talents promptly went and traded with them and made 5 more. The man who had received 2 made 2 more in the same way. But the man who received 1 went off and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. Now a long time after, the master of those servants came back and went through his accounts with them, and the man who had received 5 talents came forward bringing 5 more. Sir, he said, you have entrusted me with 5 talents. Here are 5 more that I have made. His master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You've shown you can be faithful in small things. I will trust you with greater. Come and join in your master's happiness. Next the man with 2 talents came forward. Sir, he said, you entrusted me with 2 talents. Here are 2 more that I have made. And his master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You've shown you can be faithful in small things. I will trust you with greater. Come and join in your master's happiness. Lastly came forward the man who had the 1 talent. Sir, he said, I had heard you were a hard man, reaping where you had not sown, gathering where you had not scattered. So I was afraid, and I went off and hid your talent in the ground. Here it is, it was yours, but you have it back. But his master answered him, you wicked and lazy servant. So you knew I reap where I hadn't sown, and gather where I hadn't scattered. Well then, you should have deposited my money with the bankers, and on my return I would have recovered my capital with interest. So now take the talent from him and give it to the man who has the 5 talents. For to everyone who has will be given more, and he will have more than enough. But from the man who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And as for this good-for-nothing servant, throw him out into the dark, where there will be weeping and grinding of teeth. This is a fairly powerful passage, and interestingly it comes from Matthew 25, and you probably know that the next parable is the sheep of the goats, where Jesus is again talking about the whole of humanity coming together for judgment. And those who have done good being invited into heaven, and those who have done evil being sent to hell. Although it sounds as though the response to Jesus is going to have been the response to those who were in the early church who suffered. But that's that's a theological point that probably deserves to be argued and explored elsewhere. But for the moment, let's consider the talents and also the business of hell, and what kind of Jesus it is who sends people to hell. Context is everything. And it's very easy to take this story about the talents and to put it into a kind of educational context and say, look, this is about responsibility. You need to be responsible. And if you're irresponsible, you'll get into trouble. And at one level, of course, that's true. It provides excellent material for school assemblies or that kind of morally improving talk. But context is everything. This is not about trading with money. It's not about using your gifts to better your position on earth. It's not even about your own moral probity and responding to what God has given you, though that is true. The talents that we have here look much more as though this is a form of a metaphor for the spiritual journey. Yes, Jesus is talking about money and practical things and practical gifts, but we know that he's not particularly interested with building a better society on earth. What he's coming to do is to rescue people and carry us to heaven. The context is this great rescue mission that the incarnation is. If we imagine that we're already in some kind of foothills of heaven, and all it needs is for Jesus to carry us a little closer in, a little closer up, then I think we misunderstand the dynamics of his teaching. We are actually in occupied territory. We are in a place where the ruler of this world has blinded us, has captured us, has made us impotent, has trapped us. And Jesus comes to rescue us from this rule of evil. The world is so beautiful. It's so wonderfully made. It is so stunningly impressive that it's easy to imagine that all is good. But one of the things that Jesus does is to give us a diagnosis that actually the power of evil is immensely strong. And the consequences of this power are that it blinds us to our state of being. Every so often we discover there's some discongruity, some misfunction that doesn't work. We can't put two and two together and make four. There is so much beauty and so much longing and so much to wonder at, and yet so much pain and so much evil and so much injustice. Is this a good place gone bad, or a bad place infected with good? And the answer is it's a good place gone bad. How are we to be rescued? So these talents that Jesus has given his servants, or the master has given his servants, appear to me to be best understood in a spiritual context. Jesus has called us to the kingdom of heaven, and we are in occupied territory, and he wants to know what we've done to use the gifts that he's given us against the enemy. The context surely is he's calling us to build the kingdom of heaven against which the gates of hell will not prevail. We are to carry the fight against the gates of hell. We are not just passive. We're not simply here to be to defend a position. We are the light, and darkness always gives way to light. There is nothing in darkness that can overcome light. The moment you have light, darkness is overcome. Be light, says Jesus. So here we have three people, and each are given gifts, spiritual gifts. How do they use them? One uses them very well indeed, and the Lord says, congratulations, I will give you more. You've shown you can use gifts of the kingdom. The other has been given less, but he's been given the right amount for his responsibility. Not so many that he was overwhelmed or blamed for not using them, just the right amount for his capacity. And he says, Lord, I've used them according to my capacity. And the Lord says, bless you. Neither too much nor too little. But the third man is an interesting study in morality, really, because he gets the master all wrong. He says, I've heard you are a hard man. Well, the master is not a hard man at all. These are lies he's heard. Perhaps he didn't take the trouble to find out who the master was. I've heard you were a hard man, and you wouldn't be fair with me. So I've gone on the defensive, and I've simply gone neutral. I've done nothing with them. They've been hidden, so you can have them back. And the master says, well, this was an act of terrible irresponsibility, and punishes him. Now, if this was just about responsibility, it would seem to be a little bit unfair. The man's lost nothing at all. But the situation is not static, it's a dynamic situation. Those who follow Jesus follow him because we've realized we are being called to a journey of escape from everything that has been corrupted, that is dysfunctional, that is imprisoning, to heaven, to a freedom, to a becoming that is congruent with what we were made to be in the first place. And this man just opted out. But he didn't just opt out for himself, of course. He opted out for others as well. Other people were dependent on the way he used the gifts. You and I have been given things that other people will depend on. They'll depend on us to tell them about Jesus. They'll depend on us to model turning the other cheek. They'll depend upon us to analyze the situation that we're in so that they can understand how important salvation is. They'll depend upon us to tell them about the church and the sacraments, to tell them about angels and archangels. They'll depend upon us to tell them about forgiveness and the justice of the kingdom. And if we do nothing, we don't just become neutral people who have not lived up to the responsibility God's given us. Other people suffer for it. Are we not then culpable in some kind of way? Interestingly enough, somebody wrote to me in the last couple of weeks and said, very helpfully, if you're watching this, thank you so much, because it took me a while to really think this through theologically, and talked about how my correspondent had a good relationship with the father, and an okay relationship with the Spirit. But Jesus appeared to be rather threatening. After all, there are these passages of hell and threat. And it seemed to me that if we start off from a neutral context, that Jesus is simply there to improve our lives, to give us advice, to point us in the right direction, then these passages are indeed really quite frightening. But if we begin by taking evil seriously, then these become the kind of warnings that the fire brigade might offer if they wanted to clear a burning building, saying, get out, move out quickly, your lives are in danger. Jesus, it seems to me, has come to rescue us, and not just to rescue us by showing us the way, but to rescue us by laying down his life for us, by carrying our penalties, our punishments, by carrying the great burden of our missed responsibilities on the cross. He doesn't just distribute advice, he doesn't just warn, he doesn't just threaten, he pays the price himself. He is entitled to tell us how things are. If we take evil seriously and we realize that it is trying to destroy the children of heaven, trying to wreck this wonderful project that God has initiated of making us in his image so that we can share in the life of heaven, so we can share in praise and beauty and joy and music and love and laughter and forgiveness and meaning and all the most profound things of the kingdom. But there is a spoiler out there, and the spoiler is lying to people, lying to them and neutralizing them. And then he says to us, if you adopt the lies of the spoiler, if you allow yourself to be neutralized and other people to suffer from your being neutralized, then you have chosen the dark side. You're choosing misery, evil, sadness, corruption, slander, poison. You're choosing that. Don't choose it. Down that path lies self-exclusion. I find myself deeply moved by C.S. Lewis's book on purgatory called The Great Divorce. It's very encouraging that an Anglican like Lewis had come to a sense of purgatory, and he talks about this period of purification and potential freedom after death. Once a year, people who are dead are given an opportunity to leave purgatory. It's purgatory if they choose heaven, it's hell if they refuse heaven. Once a year they're given the opportunity to go, and at every time as they approach the foothills of heaven, the thing that stops them entering into the joy of their Lord, the thing that's imprisoned them, is exposed. And once more they're invited to give it up for the greater joy of being saved. But it's very hard. For some people it's pride, for other resentment, for other revenge. And the question is, do we want to hold on to these things more than we want the love of the Father, more than we want forgiveness and humility and the companionship of heaven? And this is the great, in other words, Lewis is saying we condemn ourselves. We are given the opportunity of freedom if our appetite for love and beauty and joy and forgiveness is deep enough. But if our appetite has been corrupted and we want something more, something self-pleasuring, more than we want heaven, well then, as Lewis said, it always comes down to thy will be done or my will be done. Whether the dynamic is of us being cast out, as Jesus describes, or that's part of the hyperbole, the fact is that we end up by excluding ourselves, by refusing salvation, by allowing ourselves and our appetites to being corrupted. Always the key is penitence, to get down on our knees and say, Lord, I want you more than I want anything else. And if you fear the things that Jesus say, then they don't apply to you. They're designed to wake people up whose consciences have gone to sleep. They're designed to wake people up who have been deafened by the lies of the enemy. In the Lord of the Rings is that wonderful passage where the king has had so many lies put into his ears by Wormtongue that he's deaf. We too can be so lied to that our souls become dull and deaf, and Jesus comes to wake us up. Let us not blame him for trying to wake us up so that we can be saved, so that we can be rescued, so we can flee the the building that is on fire, rather than be burnt down. But the key to all this is to understand that evil is real, that evil needs to be overcome, that we have been called into a fight against evil, that we've been given all the spiritual gifts that we can bear, given how Jesus made us. Jesus made some people very big. I look at Padre Pio and I think, or St. Francis, some of the great saints, Teresa of Avila, Catherine of Siena, Bridget of Sweden, dear Julian of Norwich. I look at some of these people and I think, my, you were big people. Look what God gave you and look how you use these things. And I look at myself and say, well, rather smaller, I'm afraid. But God's given me some things. Am I using them for him? Am I using prayer to roll back evil? Am I using praise to allow creation to sing with God's music and echo? Am I using words to declare God's presence? Am I using evangelism, my brain, philosophy, my longing for him to make some space for the kingdom of heaven? I may be rather small, I may not be very gifted, but am I using what God has given me? So that on the last day I will say, well, Lord, here's what you gave me. I was a bit late to the party. It took me a long time to wake up. I was a bit thick spiritually. I didn't see the trouble we're in. But now, can you see the trouble we're in? We live in a moment of cultural history where evil is on the march. It's not just abortion, as we've described, but it's also freedom of speech, freedom to worship, freedom to tell people about Jesus, freedom to ridicule this complete nonsense of equality and egalitarianism that the progressive political parties try and impose as they want to build their new utopias. But to do that, they have to shut Christians up, for we will tell them the truth. There is no justice. There is no freedom without Jesus. Are you surprised you live in an age when they're closing down the churches, stopping the sacraments? If you're surprised, wake up. Wake up to the reality of evil and to the times that we're in, and to the fact that all Christian people are called to become soldiers of Christ and to use all the spiritual gifts we've been given. If you've been given a lot, use it. If you've been given a little, you have less responsibility, but some, use it. This parable of the talents is a reminder that we are going to account to the Lord one day for what he's given us and how we've used it. Let us use everything he's given us for his love, for love's sake, in gratitude for the fact that we have been forgiven. That if we had not been forgiven, we would be separated from love and from joy forever. Our weaknesses would have asphyxiated us, our corruption would have poisoned us, and all that we know and we long for would have been impossible. Out of gratitude, let us give ourselves fully to God, and let us wake up to see the evil that we are surrounded by, even if the people we live amongst have been so drugged by repetitive, cacophonous music, so drugged by shallow, vacuous entertainment, so drugged by the promise of pleasure that they don't see the danger that they or their souls are in. Let us wake up and give thanks to God and offer to him everything we have and are, to his praise and to his glory. The darkness is creeping in. We are in the fight not only for our lives, but for our souls and for his church, the bride. Let us be worthy of his mercy and all he's given us. To God be the glory forever and ever. Pray for me as I do for you.